Okay, what's up? Hello.
Hello. Say your
Hello
pretty
from the other
ass
side.
when you came in through the door. Okay. Hello, everyone. We are live. This is the Tonic Accord.
Woo!
We're not recording quite yet, but yeah, I mean, what do you want to go into first?
I mean, maybe. Oh God. Do we want to start with like a little bit like shorter one just to kind of get warmed up here? I don't know.
Sure, maybe the crime one, the crime app.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds like kind of a free flowing one. We can just see what happens.
All right. Then I'll intro us in, and then we can do like little mini intros for the breaks or whatever, how we see fit. But yeah, okay.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think this crime one would probably actually go well with like the Marjorie Taylor Greene like anti-Semitism one because they're kind of both domestic like things going on. Like that could be one episode. I don't know your thoughts, but maybe.
Sure, I mean we can popcorn into that
We'll see what
whenever you want to
happens.
transition. That's fine with me. Um,
Cool.
Not everything has to be related, right? We can just kind of transition.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I agree.
Okay, cool. All right, well let's go this one. All right,
Yes.
recording in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. This is a podcast where I, your host Drew, and the other host Alex, good buddies that studied political science in college, we discuss our thoughts on politics and kind of our opinions on, what's going on in politics. Today, we're going to be talking about a variety of things. We're trying out a new format where we kind of do a lot more popcorn. So there's a bunch of really interesting stories that I think have larger implications. Than what they originally seem. One of which is a new app called the Citizen app. This app is in the news because what it is a like it's information provided by users in various cities to kind of make a live map of crime being reported. People also listen to like police scanners and then update the information there. And so basically, I've tried it out. I've downloaded it, and it gives you like almost like a radar scan of your area, and then reports that are going on. So you'll see like on this street is a police report of an incident involving a vehicle, and then you can see that on the map. It can tell you what time that happened. 30 minutes ago was when the report first came into the app, at least. And then you can see comments from other people, mostly saying, "Oh gosh, I hope people are okay" or whatever. This also goes for like violent assaults. Even this morning, I got a notification of someone was mugged and her purse was taken somewhere in the valley near me, and I got the notification on my Citizen app. So that's what this app is, and it's getting a lot of flack because recently in Southern California there was a massive fire called the Palisades Fire that was we police believe it was started by an arsonist, which means a person purposely started the fire, which is a crime. Uh, when they were trying to find this suspect, the Citizen app was used to find a certain person, and the CEO of the Citizen app even put out his own personal bounty, like his own money, because he lives near the Palisade Fire, to find this person. They believed it was a homeless individual that was hanging around their neighborhood, a very nice, wealthy neighborhood in Southern California, and they suspected him of the fire. And it turns out it wasn't him. And so that is why this app is now getting a lot of flack, is because it's grown in popularity, but then led to 800,000 people trying to find the wrong person as the arsonist for the fire. Now the police have said it's not him, it's someone else who's in custody, and that's about as far as we know so far. However, I wanted to we wanted to talk about it. What does this implications mean for policing in our society and civics, and the limits of where, should we regulate a technology like this or not? So, Alex, what's your thoughts on the app Citizen?
Well,
I
yeah. I
know, I know
mean,
that was a lot. Sorry.
no. That was a good background. It was definitely necessary. But I'll just start out by saying I don't like a single thing about this app. Period. Just a little background that I just saw in that article you shared is that it was originally released under the name Vigilante in 2016.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like with the state of our country right now, I think the last thing we need is like a pluralistic law enforcement world where there's like different fractions of people trying to enforce the law, even if it's an app and even if it's supposed to be like, citizen accountability. I don't like it. And, I just feel like I think it was Vice that called this a prescription security service, like a private prescription security service. And just, I don't like that. Also, I feel like usually a country stays like stable in general when the state or the government has a monopoly on security. I don't think you want like a pluralistic security forces society because that to me sounds more like Iraq. But obviously that's a stretch. But basically, yeah, I just don't like this at all. It seems like when we're trying to reform the police, the last thing we need is multiple different types of security forces going around our streets. I saw like a few days ago that Vice reported that this company is working with this kind of private security organization in Los Angeles, and there is this mysterious car owned by Citizen that's been going around somewhat tracking crime as it's lively updated. I just don't like it, man. So yeah, that's my original take. I just feel like there's no way this couldn't end up dystopian, to be honest.
Yeah, that's where, and that's another thing. So there's the app itself, which is just more about citizens reporting and going off of police scanner info. But then, like you had just mentioned, the Citizen app, which is I think based out of Los Angeles, but I think active in like 14 American cities. But in Los Angeles, they're also working with a private security force, and that's this, you know, LA Protection Service or Security, LAPS, and they look like cops, they dress like cops, and that's where we really start to see some ethical dilemmas where this is like a private security force, but it's mobile, right? So currently, there is a big industry for private security, and it's almost always in the case of protecting like a private business or private property. Some of the best examples are weed dispensaries in Southern California always have an armed security guy because they aren't legally allowed to bank yet, and so they have to deal with a lot of massive amounts of cash on hand, and so all those dispensaries in California hire private security and unarmed. The difference here is that private security is on that private property all the time and during the hours of business, and then goes home after, and that's it. And they also, again, there's very specific limitations to what private security can do as opposed to a police officer. Where these guys are interesting is, the Citizen app working with this private security firm is more like a mobile service where they patrol. They have patrol cars, and there's a really interesting documentary that's basically an ad, a giant 18-minute ad for them, the Los Angeles Professional Security. I watched it all. It's super fascinating because some of the things that they do that he thinks make them look good, I think make it look like he deals with homeless people, but he's not like, he even says the things like, a lot of cops can't take the time to deal with one person moving shopping carts, right? They have to deal with the domestic abuse, and not all cops are trained for mental health issues, and they have to deal with mental health issues. So he diagnoses a problem, but then he, an untrained person who's not a mental health official, then just steps in trying to solve these issues. And so I see it as, well, there might be a problem here, but this is not the solution. Making people, like letting people basically LARP as cops without the professional training or accountability, and especially the only accountability would be to their own clients who pay them. I see that as so ripe for ethical problems and corruption.
No, absolutely. That was also what I was thinking too, because I read that part mainly where they're like, well, the police don't have enough time to deal with homeless people, so why don't we deal with homeless people? And okay, I get in theory you're like, well, we're extra forces, we have men on the ground, we can do it. But again, like you said, like I feel like in a general sense, private security are for private organizations, and they usually still have to report to the police, right? And it sounds to me like this organization, the LAPS, and along with this app, they kind of want to outsource policing to this company, and that just opens up like a Pandora's box of like, you're not cops, you do have this like citizen and user submitted incident report, and that's then like kind of where my issue though falls into it, is that like, so yeah, they want to patrol the streets, they already do have cars like suited with this technology, and my issue is that users and people are subjective and unreliable and not really great all the time. And so if they're going to be responding to user submitted incidents, some of those might be a real incident and some of them might not be. And that's
Right.
just such a weird gray area.
Yeah, like exactly. Like, and they responded to, like, in this documentary or the video that they posted, I watched. They responded to an incident where one of their clients has a private property and someone was like squatting, and so they went there, um, but then they had to wait like 45 minutes for the cops to show up because they're not cops. They can't arrest these people. They had to make like a private person's arrest, but then they're legally liable for anything that happens to them after that. Like, it's very interesting. There's a lot of gray areas, and it kind of reminds me of bounty hunting, and how bounty hunting is sometimes this gray area of like, are we, are we basically permitting vigilantism in certain aspects, and what does that mean? Like, I don't know. It's just like, it's really interesting. However, I do have to mention that if you watch this 18-minute video, the ills of policing that this guy describes are not wrong. I think he correctly diagnoses what is wrong with policing in California is, you know, I mean, he says so many Americans are one or two paychecks away from homelessness, right? I believe that. I do think we need, he talks about how police are not equipped for all the small little minor issues that happen all the day. And then how, because of the homelessness issue, homeowners feel sometimes trapped in their homes, where he gave an example of homeowners that like felt that people were throwing bottles at them, and they didn't want the people in the tents across the street to know when they were leaving for threat of, one lady found a guy smoking meth in her garage one day. Like, I agree that the homeowners have a right to not have people smoking meth in their garage randomly. But
Yeah.
is the solution to just entrust private citizens with the same rights as cops, but less accountability for, again, a private client? I don't think so.
No, yeah, I mean, and there's a couple things there. Like, I agree with you as well that, like, especially Los Angeles, just the one I always think of is, I mean, I don't need to tell you, you live there, I don't, but
Yeah.
I mean, and homelessness it's a serious problem. I mean, I haven't actually seen some of the new, like, kind of post-COVID situations, but I read about and see it on the news, and I mean, you're right, there does need to be something that's addressed, but again, like, I just don't know if a private firm that has no law enforcement training. I mean, I'm sure some of these guys do, but when it's just subjective reports from people, like I saw one of the side effects in the Motherboard, which is, I guess, Vice's like tech section. They were just talking about how this has kind of bred a lot of racism and like kind of bigoted reports as well. Because again, if you're leaving it up to the individual, they might have a subjective take on who's a threat and
Yes.
who's not. So like I do agree with you that actually maybe in a weird way, something similar to this actually could solve the idea of health workers and public health people that maybe help deal with addicts, and we don't always need the police involved in those. But again, like this is and also just like like another thing to me is that it looks like the Citizen app has a lot of data on people.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was something about how they had their own like COVID tracing app that seemed to compile a lot more data than people signed up for, like even releasing full names on some people. And also just this network. I mean, it says there's been 4 billion alerts and more than 7 million users. Like that's a lot of data, and I'm curious how regulated that is, and what could happen if there was like a severe like security breach or something. That's just a whole other thing that my mind goes to is like you have a lot of data on people, and what if there were nefarious actors? I mean, as we know, the Russians are very prone to hacking. I could see that being a really fun thing for them to do is hack this system.
Yeah, or like what happened last week is what happens when people are posting information on the Citizen app looking for someone that's not the correct suspect,
Mhm.
right? So like it's one of those weird things where I think the idea behind it is not necessarily inherently bad. Like citizens using information that is public to put on a map and give each other information. Like the fact that it's branded as vigilante, then working with a private security firm, gives it a whole different weird like LARPing cop aspect. Whereas I thought about this in just kind of a marketing perspective. I wonder if the perspective of an app like this, one without the Palisades fire, wrong arsonist kind of thing, that's a really bad PR. But if you like branded it as like women's safety, right? If you branded it as
Mhm.
like, hey, women, like band together for our information to avoid, weirdos on the street and crime, and like, if you branded it as like, something like that, right? Like feminist safety. I
Yeah.
wonder if the same app would have such a bad taste in people's mouths. Obviously, again, don't associate it with a weird private security firm. Don't put out $30,000 bounties on suspects that aren't confirmed to be the suspect. Right? All those things are bad, but I do wonder if the app on its own would be perceived differently had it been branded differently.
Well, and maybe to go even a little further with that, like, because I kind of agree with that, honestly, is that maybe if it was more focused, if it was more limited scope on what this app's actually involved in, maybe instead of just reporting any crime, which could lead from, sexual assault to violent crime to whatever else it may be, maybe you're right. Like, see that I could see being a positive is some sort of transparency network that is involved in maybe like somewhat of a digital hotline for people that maybe are being sexually abused or need help or have been confronted on the streets late at night. Like, I think you need to start incrementally. Like, but to me, again, the scope is just way too broad. Where it just, I feel like the cat could just get out of the bag, and maybe already has. I don't know. I mean that story about the homeless guy who they thought, I guess, was the arsonist. It's really not a great look. So
No.
like, I know, but I think you're right. Like something like that, like more of a focused scope on maybe a group of people or a network of people that need help could be a start. But again,
Yeah.
like right now, it just seems too all over the place, I guess.
It seems like guys that want to be cops that couldn't be cops.
Yes.
All right, what's next on the docket, Alex? What's going on your end?
Well, my brain kind of goes because we've been talking about vigilantism and how like I kind of said, I don't think the nation needs any more vigilantes right now. It kind of does put me into kind of a depressing topic, honestly. Is Marjorie Taylor Greene's consistent anti-Semitic comments and the Republican Party kind of condemning her, but not really doing much, and just global rises in hate crimes against the Jewish community. Obviously, other communities are also being, picked on, like the Asian community, the Muslim community as well. But over the last couple of weeks, there has been a huge spike in anti-Semitic crime. Like it basically started with, I think it was 3 weeks ago. Like what was it? 3 weeks ago, there was 135 reported crimes against the Jewish community, and then just last week it was almost close to 200. So just, I mean, that's a lot for any week, but it seems like since the Gaza situation between the Israeli community and the Palestinians, there's kind of been a worldwide problem where a lot of people who are actually not supporters of the Palestinian cause are just using it as a reason to attack the Jewish community. And that kind of came to fruition this week with Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I believe it was yesterday said that Nancy Pelosi forcing them to wear masks is the equivalent of the Jews being given a star during the Holocaust. And then today, it also came out that she also said that she would not support removing a Hitler statue because she wants people to learn from the past. And this is just kind of this continuous thing of like Kevin McCarthy today spoke out against Marjorie Taylor Greene and said, the Holocaust was a horrible art, just a horrible part of our history, and we need to condemn it. But again, they're not looking to censure her. She's still there. She does crazy stuff every week. Last week, she was harassing AOC. She's, Jewish space lasers, QAnon, harasses kids about school shootings. Like, she's mentally unstable. And again, it seems like the Republican Party is not willing to deal with these kooks. And that's where we're at. I just really worry that the country is just going down a path to violence and maybe vigilantism, like we talked about earlier, is because people are being given the green light to hate again. And it's really troubling.
Yeah, she's so dumb, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, like, she's really like, I think she's really stupid. I don't know what's going on in her heart as far as does she like Jewish people or not. I can't answer that question. I don't know. But I definitely know that she's completely ignorant to how off base and offensive her comment on masks, like comparing them to the Holocaust. Like she's so ignorant. It hurts. She's so stupid to compare wearing a cloth mask out like when you go to the grocery store during a pandemic to the you know genocide of a structural genocide committed in like gas chambers. Like it's just ridiculous to even compare these things. It's not even on the same ballpark, and it shows again from my point of view, this is the most snowflake crap I've ever heard. Like, you can't wear a mask for a couple more weeks? By the way, Marjorie Taylor Greene, if you got your vaccine, which I doubt she has, if you get your vaccine, you could probably take that mask off quicker. Like, we're literally almost on the way out of this pandemic, and you're still making this mask thing to be some political wedge issue, and you're comparing it to the Holocaust. Like, this is such a joke. What a snowflake like BS thing to say. Like, come on. Like, aren't you supposed to be tough? Aren't conservatives supposed to be like tough and gruff Americans that can withstand any challenge? Like, what a pussy! I'm sorry. I mean, like, not to use a genderized term, but like, just because she can't handle wearing a cloth mask, it's a joke, man. And again, like this dog whistling of like, or this weird thing where she says Jewish space lasers, and like, there's this, of course, anti-Semitism associated with white supremacy. That's pretty obvious. But then to like use, like, it's like the same thing with like Nazis and Hitler. Like, every political side wants to use Nazis and Hitler for their own political advantage, whether or not it has anything to do with the context of what they're talking about. And this is another example, like throwing out the Holocaust. Like, oh my God, come on, are you kidding me? Um, Thankfully, even though she's not getting censured, which she should be, I think, because her comments are just abhorrent, she has been stripped of her power in committees a few months ago, and that still remains. So she is kind of just flailing her arms for relevance. But yeah, it's sad.
No, I mean definitely, and no, I mean it's really interesting because the Senate actually doesn't have a mask requirement because actually most senators, except for like I think it's like two, have not. I think it's Rand Paul and one other person. I would have to check, but basically the whole Senate has been vaccinated, so there isn't a mask requirement. But in the House, there's a bunch of just loonies, and like obviously they need to have a mask mandate because unfortunately, even people like Marjorie Taylor Greene might be vaccinated, but they're never going to admit it because of their weird base like mantra that's going on with vaccinations and just COVID masks. I do like I wish I could just laugh off her craziness. My issue is that just over the last weekend there was at least a dozen reports of like actually violent hate crimes against Jews inside of the United States.
Yeah.
And the problem is that this tone deaf like almost Holocaust denialism, which to me what she's doing is kind of a new form of Holocaust denialism, where she's equivocating it to things that are not even all like at all
Yes.
related,
Right.
and it just numbs down
What
that
that
side's
was.
views. Exactly, man, and like there was a disturbing report in 2018 from CNN and I think it was YouGov, no CNN and ComRes, which is a survey in Europe, and only a third of Europeans between 18 and 34 had heard of the Holocaust. And so I just worry that if we have more leaders like her who are just willing to kind of just do these false equivalencies around the world. I mean, France has a huge problem with this right now, Germany too, just to name a few. Like, I just worry is that if we keep doing these false equivalences and strong politicians don't stand up to it, we're just going to see this happen. And like the Republican Party is in a huge dilemma because Marjorie Taylor Greene in the first quarter of 2021, I think was the most had the most fundraising out of anyone in the
Yeah.
House.
Sure is a lot of money. Yeah.
And so like there's a demand problem, right? The people want her. Like and there's not enough kooks to go around and Kevin McCarthy probably I mean he has no backbone. I think he's quite politically stupid. And yeah, he spoke out against it today, but okay, why don't we not use any of her fundraising money for anything inside of the party? Why don't we like stand up to her, maybe actually get rid of her because this needs to stop.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem is she's so like she's popular among the Trump base, but it's like, again, it's like I think people in the middle or outside of the Republican Trump circle are looking at her like she's an idiot. Like, I wouldn't put her on any kind of pedestal. She's like the conspiratorial Facebook mom Karen that just happened to get elected.
Ugh.
Um, so yeah, pretty strange, pretty strange. Definitely, like, it shows that there's this. We are certainly in that weird time, especially with the issues with Israel and Palestine going on right now, which we talked about in a different episode. There is this wave of anti-Semitism, and there's this tricky line because criticism of the Israeli government should be just that. It should be just criticism of the Israeli government, right? If you're doing the criticism, don't equate what the Israeli government's doing to all Jews. That's unfair. If you're receiving the criticism, right? If you're an Israeli hearing criticism about the Israeli government, don't necessarily equate that to criticism of all Jews. And I think everyone needs to remind ourselves of that, right? Criticism of Donald Trump was not criticism of American people, right? Or a criticism of what it is to be America. It was a criticism of Donald Trump. in the same light that criticism of Netanyahu and the Israeli government should be just that. And then it oftentimes is conflated higher. I even know I'm just here again in Los Angeles, a story about pro-Palestinian demonstrations were going on. And it got a little rowdy, and people were like yelling at some Jewish patrons of a store, and bottles were thrown. I don't know who threw the bottles, but whoever did it, it was bad. And certainly, Jewish people on the street are not responsible for what's going on in Gaza, in Los Angeles and going to Gaza. So it's this weird time where Jews and Israelis and references to the Holocaust are being thrown around a lot, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is certainly not helping.
Exactly, and just the last thing I'll say, because I totally agree with you, but we can then move on. But David Pakman, probably my favorite independent progressive podcast guy. I mean, he's Jewish, Argentinian Jewish, and he said that over the last week he's just received so many anti-Semitic tropes because he's tried to stay somewhat out of the just defending the Israeli government. He's trying to paint both sides. But he basically said the more that people are aggressive and hateful towards Jewish Americans specifically, or German Jews or whatever, they're just going to feel like they have to turn to wanting to go to Israel more. Like, ironically, by putting more hate towards the Jewish community, they're just going to have more of an allegiance to maybe turn back to the Israeli government and actually need to go to Israel. And that's kind of problematic because the Israeli government is quite bad, but the Jewish people are obviously amazing, like every other people. And it's this like kind of catch-22 is the more you push them away, the more likely they are to be sympathizing with Israel.
But it's also there's two sides to that coin because you're absolutely right. The rhetoric people use can often push people away, but it's also, to be fair, like I think some people get upset. I think some people misconstrue criticism for Israeli government as anti-Semitism, right? It does play both sides where it's like, okay, well, just because you're hearing criticism, though, don't assume it's anti-Semitism. But also, if you're going to criticize Israel, don't be anti-Semitic. And so, like, there's definitely instances where people conflate things. But as a whole, obviously, as a whole, I mean, anti-Semitism is wrong in any form. So yeah, it's a tricky thing. I mean, it's a tricky thing when people are so sensitive to this topic that you might have a point that you might think is a nuanced point, but someone may receive it so emotionally that they construe it as anti-Semitism or anti-Palestinian or something. So just but certainly certainly comparing mask wearing to the Holocaust is not a good look for anyone, and definitely plays into the downplaying of what Jews actually experienced in Europe.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like what Gina Carano said, I remember, the Mandalorian actress a few months ago when she compared like turning on your neighbors to when Nazis turned on their Jewish neighbors. Obviously, I'm simplifying that down a lot, but I thought that was like controversial enough. But Marjorie Taylor Greene really said, "Hold my beer." So
yeah. Well, unfortunately, Disney can't fire Marjorie Taylor Greene at a whim. Georgian voters have to do that. But let's maybe move on to the next topic, man. What are you feeling? What's next up on the docket?
Okay, well, I guess we could dive into kind of maybe a little talk about the economy if you're down. There's a couple things that have happened recently. First off, the Republicans actually are talking about some form of a bipartisan compromise for Biden's infrastructure plan, where they're saying they'd be willing to talk about $1 trillion, and there might be actually a vote on that on Thursday. Also, the jobs report from April predicted 1 million new jobs. There was only about 20, I think it was 2,000 or 266,000. That's what it was. So only about more or less a quarter of what was projected. The right wing is saying inflation's coming next. Everything's going to shit. The left is saying inflation will just be temporary. The economy is just getting going. And Biden's just kind of in the fray with this, man. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot going on with that.
Yeah, there is. I tend to be I think a little more optimistic. I do think the worry about inflation is valid. If you look at government spending and the way that the Federal Reserve is printing money to keep our economy afloat. However, I do think that the worry about inflation should have been consistent through the pandemic. I think now it's weird. It's just a little weird that like this conversation was not had on the right, even when Trump was passing $1 trillion stimulus packages, and then now that Biden's doing it, suddenly inflation is this boogeyman. I think inflation is an issue that people should keep an eye on. But from what I'm gathering, is that the Federal Reserve doesn't believe it to be a huge issue. They haven't changed rates much. They've seems to fill the economic hole, at least in the financial markets, from the COVID crash pretty quickly. And so while I do understand the concerns over inflation and certainly prices of goods is rising, I think anecdotally, if you talk to people, there's a big price in a rise in prices. But I think that a lot has to do with an increase in demand. I think the COVID, recession is kind of over, so there's increased demand for things. And as the supply is still behind at full potential, coming back into like manufacturing and especially in like microchips and technology, the prices will eventually even out. I think a little bit more. I think the worry about inflation is overhyped to scare people off of government spending, whereas it should not prevent government spending. It should just be maintained and kept a look at. And of course, the Federal Reserve should just keep an eye on it. If you trust them, most people don't, but they seem to do pretty well the last year.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. I'm also hesitant to really honestly pass any judgment at this time on this, just because like it's just really hard to know. Like you said, we were in basically like a government mandated recession in a lot of ways. Well, a government mandated shutdown that in some ways led to a recession, and so yeah, I mean it's inevitable that things are going to be kind of slow off the gate once this has happened. And if you could bear with me for just a second, I listened last week to the New York Times Daily that had a great discussion with this Ben Castleman guy who's an economic reporter and expert from the Times. And he talks about how, it's like kind of what we've both said is it's really just hard to tell right now. He jokes to check back in 6 months, to see where we're at that point. But he uses these kind of three theories on why the economy is. And real briefly, I'm just going to touch on them because I think they're actually interesting and they might paint why this is happening. The first theory is that the job growth was weaker because the recovery was weaker. He says we're like a car trying to get to top speed, but we aren't on the highway yet. So like instead we're just still on the access road. So you're just not to top speed yet. It's you're not driving 80 miles an hour down the highway. Well, I guess I drive 80 miles, but maybe some people don't. But and his second theory is that we're getting up to speed, but we're still in the merge moment where like there's a shit ton of cars on the highway and yeah, we're ready to get moving, but when there's a lot of traffic, it's hard to just jump on and get back going.
Yeah.
And that's his point is like it's tough to hire quickly because people are still hesitant for like such a myriad of different reasons. So it's going to be a slow recovery. But then the third theory, which I actually think is also more the conservative argument, and I do understand it, is that we're already on the highway, but we're trying to jam the accelerator too much. And basically, going with that metaphor, we're just trying to put too much money in the system at once, and it's going to overload everything. Because I think some of Biden's plans, Trump should have done a year ago. Like, Biden came into office at a great opportune time for the vaccine and for a lot of this recovery, but it's almost like, to be honest, we needed Biden a year ago to be more willing to do some of these things back then. And so now it's kind of like, okay, we're giving people money. The economy's already bouncing back in some ways, and we're still talking about more spending plans. Like maybe it's too much on the gas right now. And I don't really have a theory of which one I agree with, but I think it's just interesting to point out that it's either a slow recovery, the fact that we're just getting up to speed in the recovery, or maybe we did put too much money in, and maybe it's all three. I don't know.
To those that say that this too much government spending will somehow pull us back into the economy of last year, based on what?
You're asking me?
Yeah, or well, I mean, if you want to play the devil's advocate, I don't know if you believe this, but I mean,
No,
I just don't like. What's the evidence for that? Like, what's the evidence?
Okay. Well, it's again because we're not far enough out. It's all more speculative from economists who are either left or right, basically, right? But there is kind of this paradox, or not paradox, more just a self-fulfilling prophecy. Meaning, say someone goes to the store and sees, say, poultry prices are higher or hotel prices are higher if they're trying to get away for the weekend. They're going to go to their boss and demand a higher wage because they can't afford what they could afford a year ago. And then market prices again have to now react to that. So now then at the supermarket, just based on economic indicators, they would then probably raise their prices again. But this is going off of again, like a normal crisis. And I want to make that very clear. Like, this is not a normal crisis that's happened in the US. It was, again, a government mandated shutdown that forced people to stay home and forced a lot of these companies to just diminish what they're doing. And so I do buy into it mainly that it's going to be short sighted demand issues and short sighted
Right.
inflation, mainly because people are traveling.
That's what I think it is. I mean, that's what gas prices are high. Gas
Right.
prices are high because the COVID crash also coincided with an oil crash. Like oil was already crashing, and
Mhm.
then COVID happened. There was even less demand for oil because there was no cruises, no flights, and people weren't driving. All of those things are coming back very quickly, which is causing to a mass increase in demand for oil. So oil prices have skyrocketed back, and gas prices have skyrocketed back because the demand is increasing rapidly. That's the second theory, which is everyone's trying to get on the freeway. It's just jammed up a little bit. It's taking it a little bit slower. I tend to buy that a little bit more as an explanation as to why prices are increasing, why there's a lag in the economy, why there's a slow hiring, why there's people are trying to hire and they can't they can't fill jobs because I think like like so many people are going back or there's also people have been getting unemployment for a while and want to find something better than $15 an hour. There's a vast demand for a wage increase. um, that is more likely, like that explains more to me than the idea that, well, Biden is spending so much and because of that we are seeing a lag. I don't buy that argument. I can see how Biden spending might increase inflation in a few years. Like I can see that, but that's not unlike any other time when massive government spending has been used to pull people out of a recession. And if anything, I think if you look at Obama's actions after the 2008 recession, I would personally argue we should have spent more. And I think that's what Biden
Mhm.
is doing.
No, absolutely. No, I would probably go more your direction on that as well. You know, I also think, I mean, we talked about this when the pandemic started, how pandemics historically do seem to change countries, they change societies. And there's sometimes some good takes out of it. I mean, they talk about how the Black Plague was kind of what I guess exasperated inequality to the point where they actually started looking at more equitable programs and the idea of paying people wages,
Hmm.
which seems now mundane, but back then that would be something huge. And to me, it seems like Biden is spending a shit ton of money in relation to any other president before this. But again, maybe the pandemic was just kind of the nail in the coffin for kind of an outdated economic system. Like we are behind most of the world. I was reading in The Economist. I think it was just us in Papua New Guinea who don't have like paid maternity leave, who
Right.
who don't have. I mean, we're one of the only countries that doesn't have a public option for healthcare. Like to me, it's like I wish we could just get rid of the word socialism. Because Biden isn't a socialist. To me, like where a lot of the people in his administration are going is kind of Scandinavian capitalism, the Nordic model, democratic socialism in a lot of ways, and they just want more robust safety nets with more robust public infrastructure, but also a free market. And that's going to take some spending. And I think like maybe there's a zeitgeist changed on the left that is happening right now because it does seem like these programs are popular not just with Democrats but also with Republicans, except for healthcare. But the other ones they're actually pretty like evenly popular with both sides. So to me, it seems like most Americans realize that maybe throwing more money into the problem is necessary, but I think now we're seeing a backlash from the right and kind of the 20th century economists more who are used to kind of the status quo and what we used to take as fact.
I also think it's worth noting the shift like what you said is like what people find popular. One of them, I think the one you were referencing, is infrastructure. I think infrastructure is something that if you just say, should we invest more in infrastructure, I think most Americans agree. I would have said yes under Trump. I did. I remember when Trump mentioned infrastructure. I hope he did it. He didn't. I'm equally excited about infrastructure for Biden. I don't care who does it. I think we do need to revamp infrastructure. But that's one of those things where I think there's a shift in the focus on how to get us out of COVID. I think you're right. Like maybe if we're coming to the end of this year, still talking about direct payments, maybe it is time to like shift from talking about direct payments to more how do we reopen and reopen well with investing in new infrastructure and investing in infrastructure for EVs. I think that's where the administration's going. I think that's what this new fight in Congress is about, the infrastructure bill. And I think that is a good way to solve the problem of the economy, the slow economy coming out of COVID, is invest in infrastructure. Um, and but it's proving to be politically challenging. Originally it was something like $2 trillion is what Biden proposed. They had to cut back 500 billion of it. Republicans proposed a counteroffer of only 500 billion, so 25% of what Biden wanted. Um, there's talks about revamps to the VA that has to get cut. Talks about research and development that Republicans want to cut. There's a big political battle going on, and um, but I think that Biden needs to get a win. I think that one is, it's something that I think could be very politically advantageous if he gets a big infrastructure bill from both sides. But two, if he doesn't get an infrastructure bill, and I think it looks really bad, and I think was supposed to be one of his more important objectives.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, just before we started recording, I'm reading something off of Bloomberg, excuse me, here that says the GOP are going to be offering Biden nearly 1 trillion for infrastructure plans.
Okay, so they've upped it.
They have. Like, I do think that, again, Mitch McConnell and some of the guys like him are pragmatic in the approach that I'm sure he understands that they need to get something passed as much as Biden understands they need to get something passed.
Right.
The House is crazy. The House is crazy. The Republicans in the House, I think some of them are beyond any repair. But there are senators that I think are willing to compromise. But the problem is, to me, there's a huge disconnect in the fact that the Republicans have become these faux populists where they're the men of the people, the men and women of the people. And in reality, how Biden wants to pay for this is his corporate and wealthy tax hikes. Like, if you're making over 400 grand a year, they're going to raise your taxes to pay for this. They're going to raise corporate taxes. And the Republicans want to tax average people that are using the new infrastructure. They want to tax people that are driving on these bridges, these toll roads, etc. And again, that's the disconnect, is the supposed party of the people that Trump, had this whole thing he was doing. They, again, aren't willing to help the people. And again, they're kind of country club, out of touch Republicans still. And that's the big issue with this infrastructure bill, is that the Republicans don't want to raise any taxes on that, 1% or on corporations. And it's going to be really tough when the one thing I've actually liked about the Biden administration is I don't agree with some of the economics of, like, say, that global corpus tax rate and how that would work. But the fact that they're talking about doing something and they actually have a plan instead of just Trump's endless spending with really no good economics behind them, to me, it's nice to see. But again, the Republican Party doesn't seem to care about spending anymore. And so to me, that's the game of chicken we're seeing, is like, who's going to budge first on how we pay for this? And then there's, the parliamentarian option for budget reconciliation. And I've actually heard some reports that maybe Biden's being counseled by advisors and friends that he should just settle with some kind of milquetoast compromise, but then later use budget reconciliation for a more in-scope infrastructure plan. Again, like, they only get 3, as far as I'm concerned, a year of budget reconciliation, and they've already been quite gung-ho with it, so I don't know if they want to keep going down that route.
Can you explain a little bit what that is, budget reconciliation?
Yes. So it's basically this kind of weird system where they can, let me articulate this better, is that basically what they do is they skip the filibuster and skip deliberation to the point where basically what they do is, so with having a small majority in the House and the Senate, Democratic leaders can basically use this special process, which is called the reconciliation, to just quickly advance this high priority fiscal legislation. And it was created by the Congressional Budget Act. I think it was in the mid 70s. And it basically expedites this, but it can only be used for budgets and debt limits and spending and tax bills. And so basically they can skip the filibuster, and they have someone called the parliamentarian who can help them speed it through. But they're only allowed 3 of these during the year, just because of, the idea of democracy and discussion. They can't do it all the time.
Right.
But what their goal basically would be is that if you have a very simple majority, and we're talking about razor thin edge, they can basically use the parliamentarian who is not in Congress from what I've gathered, and believe me, I'm not an expert on this, that is someone who is outside of the democratic system who is involved in this, who was appointed. I correct me if I'm wrong on that, listeners, but I believe that's what happens, and this person then can approve it. But it's a slippery slope. They don't do it very often, and I don't know if that's how you want to keep legislating. Kind of similar as packing the courts and getting rid of the filibuster. It might work in the short term, but the long term kind of scares me. And but it does like my two remedies just really fast would be either do a compromise now just to maybe bring some sanity in the country of some resemblance of bipartisanship and then later use it to pass more extreme measures or just pass these bipartisan bills as they go. But it's still hard because there are a few bipartisan bills like the House agreed, the Senate agreed on a anti-Asian hate crime bill. They've agreed on basically kind of a somewhat nationalist, bringing semiconductor manufacturing back to the U.S. so we're not relying on Taiwan for almost all of it.
Sweet.
Like there's some things we agree on, right? But like the problem is like this infrastructure bill right now in its current stage has so much in it that you're not going to find both sides to agree on it ever.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes, and that's why there's this interesting issue of like there's all this talk about this bipartisanship on an infrastructure bill, and I agree there should be, but I don't think it's going to happen to the point in which we want. Like, at a certain point, it seems like Biden has signaled that he wants to have bipartisanship, but he will go on without it. If Republicans don't want to play ball, then he'll just focus on getting Democrats. So we'll see. In which Democrats might be easier to sway than Republicans, and at least to get something through. But it should be interesting. I certainly think we need an infrastructure bill, and not just roads and bridges, but also like I think one is as big as the EV infrastructure. I think that's the way the winds of change are going towards electric vehicles, and I think a good one to push that along to help reduce emissions is to build as many charging stations as you would a gas station, right? Make it so that it's not a hassle, or you don't have to be a homeowner to own a Tesla or to own any kind of EV, right? You should be able to charge them pretty availably, and as the technology gets better and the infrastructure gets better, I imagine within 10, 20 years you won't have an issue at all about charging your EV or the running out of range or whatever. And so I think get advancing that infrastructure, advancing especially green infrastructure is super cool and important, and puts people to work, but makes jobs. People have to build those, and I think it's a good thing. So I hope we see more bipartisanship, because I think infrastructure is something that everyone can get behind. It's literally building our country back. It's building our country.
Absolutely. And just the last thing I will just add to that is that it like with Biden's stimulus economic relief package that he passed a couple months ago, they pulled the Bulwark guys were talking about it. I forget the specific poll, but they were polling voters in the Midwest, Republican voters, who thought that the Republicans actually voted to pass the stimulus bill.
Yeah.
and because it was popular with a lot of like more, I would say a lot more independent or center right voters. It was very popular with them. I don't know if you're ever going to appease the QAnon people, to be completely honest. But so I'm worried again that Republicans can just keep going against this, keep fighting it. And even if it somehow passes through budget reconciliation, they can again play the faux, hey, we supported this, because it's a weird thing where the Republicans basically can just try to stop these policies, but then when they pass, they can still campaign on them at home.
Yeah,
and
they
I'm
can tout
worried they're
them.
going to do that. Yeah, I'm worried they're going to do that again.
That's so stupid. Yeah, because I remember that one. It was like, well, I would have voted for it if it didn't have all this other stuff, but I wanted the good stuff for you, so thank me. And it's like, yeah, but you voted no to all of it. Anyway, all right. Well, the last one is, I think, the most interesting, and certainly the one that puts me in an interesting position, because I had thought this was a wacky idea as well a year ago, but now again. But basis of the show, you get new evidence and new things come to light, and you change your opinion based off of it. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the evidence that now, legitimate evidence that is now suggesting that the COVID-19 SARS-CoV influenza flu might actually have come out of a lab in Wuhan. And this is, becoming a big topic of discussion, because, again, for a long time last year, Trump was touting the idea that it might have come out of a lab. There was not evidence of that publicly at the time. People at the time took that as a deflection of responsibility. At least some people did. And it was a big media campaign against it. PolitiFact said, it was a big lie that it came out of a lab, that it was manufactured out of a lab. However, now we have evidence from the Biden administration. So again, for those that might not trust Trump and trust Biden more, now we have evidence coming out of the current administration that does suggest, that says that I think it was in August of 2019, people at this facility, this medical, viral infection research facility, 3 people in Wuhan got sick in August of 2019. And we're looking at the records around that, and it might suggest that COVID came out of that lab. So first thoughts for you, Alex. I know you have a personal horse in this race. What do you think? What do you make?
Yeah, so first off, it was not August 2019, it was November 2019.
Okay.
And the reason why that's important is because that was right when experts think the virus started circulating in China. And so that brings up, but I'm going to get to that in a little bit. But first, yeah, man, I'm really excited to finally talk about this. For a while, to me, it seemed taboo to talk about, to be completely honest. It was one of those things that I've kind of have a strong opinion on, but I was always afraid to kind of share it just because of kind of the bullshit surrounding it. And I think, like you really perfectly said there, was that unfortunately Trump, because of his kind of nativist anti-China policies, just picked this up right away. Him and Mike Pompeo were early, just proponents of this lab leak theory or hypothesis. And the problem is that Trump didn't actually have any reasons for it. He didn't have any background or research or evidence. It was just China's bad. It came from a lab. And it was easy to also point fingers at Anthony Fauci and a lot of these, like the NIH, because the NIH has been reported to be involved with this lab in one way or another through WHO funding. So basically, this all fit into Trump's messaging. The problem is that my theory is that Trump heard experts. Trump's not a good listener, but he heard experts in his administration talking about some feasibility of this, and he decided to just spew off on it. The same way, they were talking about how bleach can help kill COVID on surfaces, and
right.
He, heard half of that and went out and spewed it.
Yeah.
That's where I kind of stand on this. And so just so people know, basically what, and this is fact, this is fact, is there is a lab in right outside of Wuhan, China, which is a level 4 lab, which is kind of super intense. They work on Ebola. They work on studying the potential of biocontaminants. They've worked on the first SARS virus, the first MERS virus, and this lab was right next to Wuhan. They actually did develop it very safely, mainly they put it above floodplains, made sure it was earthquake resistant, because obviously if something gets out of this lab, it could be super bad. But the problem is, like everything, the Chinese government is not transparent, and I do find that when you have a hierarchical system of loyalty, it's very likely that a cover-up's going to happen. And I could understand why both the WHO and the Chinese government and European and American scientists involved in this would not want this to get out, because it would A, get rid of their funding, and B, it would just be a bad look for these labs that could be necessary. But so basically what the theory is it says that basically this virus was part of gain-of-function research.
Right.
And I'm just going to read you what gain-of-function research is. Gain-of-function research refers to the serial passaging of microorganisms to increase their transmissibility, virulence, and tropism. So basically what they're doing is they're putting this in a lab, hyper-focusing on it, and running a bunch of iterations on different controlled experiments on it, in the likelihood that it's maybe going to exhibit symptoms that maybe in nature it could evolve to exhibit. So the idea is that this COVID virus is acting quite interestingly, I guess we could say. There's a lot of side effects that were not linked with the first SARS or MERS, like brain fog, stroke, long-term heart problems, fatigue that have lasted months. And the theory is, if you're going into this, is that these gain-of-function research could have brought these out over time in the lab, and then someone working in the lab brought it home. Right. And that's where we're at. And unfortunately, the media has misinformed people by saying it was bioterrorism, and that's what Trump was blaming the Wuhan lab for doing, right. Which is not true. Right. And so, yeah. So Drew, what do you think about this lab? What's your take on this? Because I'm obsessed.
Well, I mean, for a little bit, I felt like I got caught between my hands and my pants, because yes, I had also I had criticized Trump for throwing out these conspiracy theories really early on in the pandemic, and again, I do still believe that he did that as a means to deflect responsibility for, I think, his pretty poor response to the virus. However, like anything, when we get new information, we have to adapt our thinking, and we have new information that says that this lab could have done it. Now, I think what you mention is very important. The idea that this has come out of a Chinese lab does not mean that China designed it to kill Americans and had planned it and we had somehow secretly funded it. Like, I can see the conspiracy people going crazy with this and misinterpreting, again, they see that, oh, look at the media got something wrong. That means everything I think must be then validated. Well, no, that's not how this works. Look, the devil is in the details. The gain of function debate is a serious one that I'm not nearly qualified enough to make a full statement. But the idea is that yes, gain of function is basically we soup up these viruses in the lab so that we can better understand what they might mutate to, better create defenses for them if they get in the future. It's basically like, I don't know, if you're trying to make a bullet. I don't know. I don't know what I'm thinking here. Like, souping up a gorilla in a lab to see if you can make a body-proof suit that's gorilla-proof. Well, what happens if the gorilla gets out and now you have a problem? But the idea was to make something beneficial for society. The idea was to use science in a lab-based scenario to, create defenses for these things. However, if this is the case, it is a bad thing if that gain of function research then leads to a viral disease getting out. That is the problem. So there is a legitimate debate about gain of function research, the cost benefit analysis, right? That risk benefit analysis of that research. I am all for having that debate. I am all for looking into more of the origin of COVID, because again, if it's a failure of some regulation at the research lab in Wuhan, we should address it. We need to solve that. But we can't start jumping to conclusions that, one, Dr. Fauci had purposely lied to us for a year. Because actually, Dr. Fauci still claims he doesn't believe it's from the lab. He still thinks that the most likely creation that no one knows, but he still thinks the most likely way it created was through bats and that kind of transmission. So again, we still don't know, but now we're getting evidence that we need to look into it more. And I'm 100% behind looking into it more. And that's it. That's really all it should be. And I think that I worry that conspiracy theories and QAnon types are going to conflate this to be a vindication that Trump was so right about China. And when in reality, it's not. I don't think China purposely made this virus to destroy the global economy. I think it might have been if it is this gain of function problem, then we need to have that conversation. But we need to have the evidence behind it first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's something really important to make clear is because, I do believe it came from a lab. I'll just say it. But again, I'm also like very hesitant to take just any information, or just anyone's rhetoric to back it up. And the Wall Street Journal, who did report that, intelligence report from Trump officials who said that these 3 people tested positive for COVID in November, right before the outbreak began, it was in the last days of Trump's administration. And the officials who read it couldn't agree on the strength of this intelligence.
Right.
So this does make me wonder if Trump just wanted this released as kind of a final gaslighting of the pandemic, which, again, doesn't mean that this didn't come from a lab, but it also just means that the timing of Trump having his officials and intelligence put this out right before he's leaving office is never a good look to me. But then again, on the Chinese side, like, to me, this is kind of an Occam's razor thing, which I've been trying to use to kind of break through this. And to me, it coming from a lab where they were studying SARS, and there were reports in 2013, of 2013 of a SARS virus escaping from a lab in Beijing. To me, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Also, there's no bats that carry SARS that are within even hundreds and hundreds of miles of this lab. So it does make you wonder how it got to Wuhan. It could have got to Wuhan naturally, but to me, it's as plausible that they were just studying this in a lab that it jumped to a bat. Because this virus does act much different than SARS-1, I guess if we call it that. Because SARS-1 was highly deadly, and it was kind of transmissible, but it didn't really get far out of Asia. And same with MERS in the Middle East. It was I think it was a bat bite on a camel, and then they ate the camel. And but that still also wasn't as transmissible as this. Just the spread was less. So it does make you think like this new, COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 virus is acting in different ways, and it doesn't help. Again, last thing I'll say is that the Chinese government, during the time when there was a big lens on this lab leak hypothesis, they basically created this other conspiracy, which was about frozen meat coming from Australia and the Americas causing COVID. And so the Chinese banned the import of frozen meats from parts of the world, saying that's where they first got COVID. And everyone's just like, that's not true. Then the same month, the WHO actually investigated this Wuhan lab and said they didn't find any evidence of the lab leak theory being possible. But then Business Insider also interviewed someone with the WHO who admitted that the Chinese government didn't give them all the necessary information. So my worry is that this is actually something important to know, because if we're working on treatment, vaccines, and do we keep doing gain of function research or stop it?
Right.
Like, we need to know where this virus came from. But
Yeah.
like the sad reality is, I think the Chinese government's probably already destroyed all the evidence if it's from a lab.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing is now like if like we should absolutely look into the origin of this more because this evidence has come out. I'm certainly interested in the risks of gain of function research because again, if this is some playing with fire stuff where it's like, yeah, we could eradicate diseases, but then or we could also end up creating the one that kills us all. Then yeah, maybe we should not flip that coin. So I'm certainly all about reanalyzing gain of function and looking into that. But one thing for sure is we've talked about before, way before even this new evidence is we can't really trust what China's going to do. China cannot be like involved in its own independent or its own quote unquote independent research or whatever. Like whoever gets to the bottom of this cannot be China or even the WHO. We've had our we've talked about our own worries about the WHO's closeness to China and its director. I think it would have to be, outside of those organizations or countries that other people should be involved in trying to find out the origin. But I don't think we should go as far as what Tucker Carlson is saying, whereas that Anthony Fauci is telling us to wear masks against COVID, even though he's the one that funded it because the NIH funded a little bit of this. Dude, we just cannot go that far, man. Like, we don't know for sure where this came from yet. And we really can't to say that international cooperation in viral research is somehow equivalent to then Tony Fauci being responsible for COVID deaths. I just don't go that far.
Well, I mean, and also, I mean, I would contribute more deaths from COVID to Fox News and Trumpism than Anthony Fauci. And I know that's not there's probably people that are not going to like to hear that, but I mean, Trump's rhetoric and the false narratives on the right, like where Sean Hannity's been vaccinated and he still won't admit it on the air, and I'm sure Tucker has as well.
Oh, yeah.
Then they're just putting this scaremongering anti-Chinese stuff. All it does is A, add to hate crimes inside of the United States, and B, it's just going to divide us more where we can never get to the answer. I just feel like Trumpism ruins everything in terms of information and the media,
Right.
like because Rand Paul is a big anti-vaxxer all of a sudden, which is interesting because he's a doctor, he's an optometrist or something like that. So you should really only ask him for medical advice if you have eye issues. But he's been one of the big anti-Fauci guys, one of the big anti-vax guys in this. And to be honest, man, Rand Paul, you don't know what you're talking about either. But they're using it for political means. See, I just want answers from people who know what they're doing and are transparent about it. And we're not getting that either. And the media just seems to still be stuck on Trump. And so if Trump says it, it's bad. And Trump is just not a good judgment of a story anymore, to be honest.
It's true. It's true. I think it is. I think it is a very valid criticism that the original theory around the lab leak was tainted with Trump's own untrustworthiness. That it was so associated with Trump that people then, including myself, assumed it was just a baseless conspiracy theory. And at the time, I think what Trump was talking about was right. Trump was talking about China made it to take us down and whatever, and don't look at me. But now again, it's like it's worth noting that Trump is not in the picture anymore, and these conversations need to be had without him as part of the context. And without Trump as part of the context, it does seem like there's a little bit of evidence that we need to look into this some more, and perhaps take a look at gain of function research and what that means. But but like you said, is like people like Tucker Carlson. I don't think Tucker Carlson really has a horse in the race, has ever really cared about gain of function research before this, but is only using it as a way to kind of a political chip against Anthony Fauci and the mainstream leftist media that lied to you for a year ago. It's like, yeah, man, like the media made a mistake. PolitiFact even had an editorial article about how they changed their facts related to this gain of function research and stuff. Um, and yeah, we adapt our viewpoints based off of new evidence, and I hope that that's just what everyone else continues to do.
Yeah, and last thing I'll say is that I just think it maybe shows that people should be less quick to just trust what they're told, because both sides of the media during the pandemic, I think the right has been more dangerous, but both sides of the media have jumped to conclusions without
Sure,
enough evidence. And
absolutely.
I mean, it really does craft the public opinion in a country that doesn't need more divisive ideas. And yeah, I mean, I tell Fox News to look in the mirror when they say that, oh, Washington Post put out an article about the debunked lab theory. It wasn't debunked, but Fox News has also had a lot of anti-vax stories. They talk about white replacement. Like, they're
Yeah.
they're just guilty in different ways. So, I mean, I just think Anthony Fauci, I think he's flawed. He hasn't done everything perfect. It's a novel coronavirus. What the hell is he supposed to do? But he's trying, and I think his intention is bringing the world back to normal. I don't think Tucker's mission is to bring the world back to normal. I think he wants to bring us divided more and more because it's better for his ratings. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's the irony. It's like, again, it's the irony of hearing Tucker Carlson ask for a nuanced conversation about a complex scientific issue like what is it, gain of function research, and you're like, okay, like that's a really complicated issue. Like gain of function research is something that imagine almost all of us have just heard about recently, and then you go on to like tell your viewers to like call out people that wear masks, like anti-mask. You're like, oh my god, dude. Like, okay, so you want a nuanced conversation about scientific research on one hand, but then you also want complete culture war related to basic science on the other. So that's what sucks to me is it's like, you know. I will wholeheartedly admit that I was wrong about these theories regarding the lab leak because I am mature enough to understand that I have changed my opinion based on new evidence, right? And I just don't think that those that feel vindicated like this on the QAnon side have that same maturity where they'll take this as, see, I'm fully validated when 80% of everything else they say is complete freaking garbage. Anyway, but
wait till
yes.
Marjorie Taylor Greene says anything about it, then we're screwed.
Yeah, exactly. But I certainly do want to look into it. I certainly want to find out what's going on, and I'm not against the transparency. So, yeah, I guess that's where we stand on that.
Yeah.
What else? Anything else you want to mention before we get out here, Alex?
Well, I mean, just quick thought if you have it. What do you think about all this crypto stuff? Just going up and down.
Dogecoin to the moon. It's interesting, man. I own a little bit of Bitcoin and Dogecoin just to play for fun. Just stuff that I am willing to lose. I'm just basically gambling. I do not think that these coins are going to offer this like complete new economic system. I don't think they're going to go away anywhere soon either. But it's interesting to see. But certainly, if you're out there playing these coins on the market, just view it as gambling because that's kind of what it is. Especially when you have major world powers like the U.S. and China trying to enact regulation on these coins, their value might diminish quickly in the eyes of the internet. But for now, it's the hype, right? There's a lot of hype around it. People like to play hype, and hype is worth something. So I don't know. Those coins are interesting, but I don't know if it's like I'm certainly not sold on like Bitcoin's going to change my world kind of thing.
I mean, also, yeah. Like, do you think that it's a little like disingenuous for Elon Musk though to tweet out like, "Oh, I didn't know how much Bitcoin mining was bad for the environment." It's like people knew this for people
Yeah,
knew this for a while, right? Like, and to me, he seems like the tweeter in chief for cryptos now. Like, he has the same impact Trump has on elections
he's
with like cryptos.
he's a meme lord, and in the words of his own wife, or I guess baby mama, I don't know, but is
Sure.
the person he has that kid who I can't pronounce his name because it's literally dashes and e's and sevens, but his baby mama Grimes, in her own words, has said. He's a little immature, and I think that's the case. I think Elon Musk is just like a meme lord who likes to meme around and doesn't really fully think of the implications of what he's doing on a larger scale. And that's really it. I also don't think, I think maybe at the beginning, but over time, Elon Musk's tweet, especially regarding like Dogecoin, has had less and less of effect on the price. He's even tweeted things like "to the moon" and it goes down. So I think the it was a little. It was like the same thing. It's like Elon Musk. It was the hype. It was the same thing. It was just hype as much as the coin was hyped. And then now we're realizing that Elon Musk actually doesn't have that much of a say on the crypto market, and actually doesn't influence the prices immediately. So he can't just like manipulate the market constantly, which is a good thing, because if he was doing that, that would be problematic.
No, absolutely, yeah, and like, I mean, I watched his SNL because I was hoping it'd be funny. It was horrible, by the way.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
It was not a good episode, but yeah, I mean, like I think he's interesting. Like he's obviously smart. I think his SpaceX stuff is going to be like super monumental. But yeah, like I think like Dogecoin just actually in a way, because I bought it when it was like, I think it was like 3 or 4 cents, and I also didn't sell when I should have, and I hate myself for it. But now I'm just sitting on something that's useless. But the fact that it's such a driving cultural phenomenon shows me that a lot of people just have no faith in like financial institutions anymore.
Yeah.
And like I do think the blockchain technology. That's why I'm a big Ethereum guy, is because I actually think blockchain itself could be good for other things like
Yes.
like global transparency, open information. But cryptos, I don't know. But I think the big remaining thing out of cryptos is blockchain itself.
Yes, that's another good. That's from all the. I mean, like I have some friends that are like super into crypto, and they all say the same thing: is the real value is the blockchain technology, and whether it's
Mhm.
digital property, ensuring digital property, or NFTs, and stuff like that. Like that seems to be the where the real value is. Not so much the Shibu Inu meme coin called Dogecoin, like. Look, if you just want to flip some money, if you want to waste some money to make some money, then get into it. But I'd really do research on what the technology you're investing is before you really put some money down. If you're in it for like the technology of it. Other than that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, just have a
It's
diverse
weird.
portfolio. Don't blow all your money on Bitcoin. Have a diverse portfolio of multiple things. That's probably the
Last
best advice.
last question on Bitcoin, because I agree with you there, and then I'll stop boring everyone with these Bitcoin rantings. But do you think that like it's less Elon Musk and the fact that the Chinese government's just like, yeah, we're cracking down on these, because we like, obviously to me it was a no brainer that China is against like cryptocurrencies that have no like
Decentralized.
stationary bank,
Yeah.
right? like
Yeah.
like don't you
No.
think that like it doesn't really matter if China likes Bitcoin or not?
Um. Does it? China likes Bitcoin. Well, I think it matters. It's hard to say. It's hard to say if China's opinion on Bitcoin will stop it or not. But I do think China's opinion, China's actions regarding Bitcoin is certainly a bigger effect on the price than Elon
Yeah.
Musk's actions. Elon Musk, I think, is now just tweeting like out to empty air, right? It doesn't, at least as far as affecting the price of these coins. I think that what China's saying is we're going to actively make government policy to completely regulate and ban the use of Bitcoin with major companies. That is certainly going to scare investors away more than anything Elon Musk would say.
Well, yeah, no, I agree. And like also China is creating their own cryptocurrency, which is like a crypto version of their own, like,
So it's
paper
not
currency.
crypto; it's Sino currency.
Yeah, it's like a digital Sino currency. What is it? The yuan? Yuan, I can't pronounce it, but I think that's more the reason why China's against it. They don't like open networks, they don't
Nope.
like transparent information,
They want to be in
and
control.
they want to market their crypto or their digital currency. And so yeah, I mean, I do think something to watch actually, like, is that countries are going to start adopting digital currencies, and then that might bring into question like what's the point of those when there are decentralized cryptos as well. So that's something to be fascinating to kind of watch for, I think.
I can't wait to just have my money chip project my bank account out of my neck or whatever when everything's digital, or like my eyeball, like my you just scan your eyeball and pay for stuff and then also display your account. I don't know. Anyway,
Along with your COVID chip.
yeah, yeah, or you have your blockchain code tattooed on your ass or something from Memento.
There you
Anyway, That should probably wrap it up for this episode of the Tonic Accord, guys. I hope you found that interesting, informative. Please, of course, always do your own research on all these topics. We are just scraping the surface, especially really complex things like gain of function research. That's definitely something that I'm going to have to look more into myself because it is a complex scientific issue. And yes, so please do your own research on these things. Have a plethora of sources. And let us know your thoughts on any of the topics we discussed, and stay tuned for more episodes of the Tonic Accord.